Hello. Thank you very much for coming. And I would like to welcome His Serene Highness, Prince Albert II of Monaco, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. We're here today to have actually a very provocative discussion called Beyond Polar Bears and Ice. Why polar bears and penguins, and why the ice crisis is important to all of us. So I'd like to introduce Your Serene Highness, and he is remarkable in many ways. In relationship to this conversation, he is an intrepid explorer, both as a marine explorer and an ice explorer. He's been to the Antarctic, to the South Pole. He's been to the Arctic and the North Pole. And he's also gone to the deepest part of the Mediterranean Sea with another explorer, Victor Vescesco, and that was 5,109 meters. In a craft that Victor built. It wasn't until 2006, after a trip to the Arctic, that the Prince decided to establish his foundation. And from there, he initiates a lot of really innovative projects to help people in the Arctic and projects in the Antarctic, as well as communities. He loves the ice, and he loves the people, and he loves the creatures. So please welcome Prince Albert. We're waiting for Jonathan Rockstrom.
No, he's here.
You are here, sir. So, you know, I love introducing people that really, frankly, need no introduction. And Johan is one of the most premier climate scientists in the world. He's influenced a lot of leaders, a lot of policymakers. He is a professor at the Swedish Climate Institute. He has many degrees. He's written several books. I highly recommend that you watch some of his videos. And he's well known as leading the team that developed the framework for planetary boundaries, and recently has been talking a great deal about tipping points. So please welcome Johan. Shreya is one of Global Choice's Arctic Angels, one of 31 that we have in 28 countries. And she is a very passionate climate activist, climate justice activist from Nepal. And she has been experiencing, her family and her community have been experiencing what's happening in the third pole, the Himalayas, and how they have been dealing with that. And she's going to share some of her stories. She also led the youth for NDCs in Nepal, and they were able to get the ministries for the very first time to acknowledge the youth voice and commit to including them in forums where decisions were made, including COP. Please welcome Shreya. Sylvia Earle will be coming in on Zoom, and I will introduce her in a few minutes. So I want to set the context here a little bit. The ice crisis is about the cryosphere. The cryosphere is all the ice and all the snow on the planet, and it's unraveling on our watch. There are 3 poles: the Antarctic, the North Pole, the Arctic, and the 3rd pole, where Shreya lives, is the Himalayas and the Tibetan Plateau. All of them are in trouble and melting quickly, but the Arctic is melting 4 times faster, warming 4 times faster, and melting faster than other parts of the cryosphere. So in part, because we have Arctic experts here, and Shreya from Nepal, we're going to focus on those 2 places for this conversation. I'd like to start this, so to set a context, this is how quickly the ice has disappeared since 1979 satellite images to 2020 August, which is the summer. So we've lost a huge amount. 95% of the old ice is gone, which reflects more of the sun's heat and radiation. This chart, if you'd look at this graphic quickly, this shows that the Arctic and the Arctic sea ice is a trigger point for other tipping points on the planet. This is one of the reasons why it is so important, because its global impacts are daunting. And this is why it matters. This is what's happening. The loss of sea ice in particular is linked to events, they're not events anymore, they're episodes, climate episodes around the planet. So that sets the context of what we're discussing today. And I would like to start with you, if that's okay.
So it was difficult to start off, but I'll try.
And one of the things that I think a lot of people would like to know is that you have followed in the footsteps of your great-great-grandfather, who was one, if not the first, oceanographer, and also an intrepid explorer into the Arctic regions. But you've done it not out of legacy obligation. You've done it because you have a love and a passion for the ice and for the people. You were just up there. You just came back recently from an expedition. In June. And what did you see? What did you personally see and feel? And what came out of that trip for you?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this panel discussion, and thank you all for being here today. I think it's a very important, not only a very important topic, but very important to, to recall all the to set the context and to recall everything that is happening in both polar regions. Yes, the extraordinary legacy of my great-great-grandfather, Prince Albert I, who had 4 expeditions to the Arctic, 4 out of the 28 that he did in other parts of the world, mostly the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. And his accounts of what he saw there and what he experienced there, and he went there, of course, with scientists and with he led those expeditions, although he wasn't scientifically trained himself. But he was a great promoter of oceanography, which was then, this was in the 1890s and early 1900s, it was a very new science then, but he understood the importance of it, and he saw, he was an incredible visionary, and he really saw the importance of getting more scientific knowledge and gaining more evidence and exploring the oceans. And he was was not afraid of adventure and of going out and facing the elements. And so it's thanks to his vision and his legacy that, of course, he set up the Oceanographic Institute in Paris and the Oceanographic Museum in Monaco, which I hope most of you know, or at least have visited, and the incredible collections that museum holds. But his accounts on the Arctic, especially, are go into a lot of detail, and he brought back not only films, but that we were able to reconstitute some of them because they weren't on a modern support, but also, thank you very much. I have water. Thank you. But also the photographic evidence. And when I did my first trip up to the Arctic, which is in the summer of 2005, with some people from the Monaco Scientific Center and the IAEA Ocean Lab in Monaco, because we took some samples there, and we retraced the route of his 1907 expedition. No, I'm sorry, the 1906 expedition, and we used, and we went to the same bay, one of the same bays that he went into, and to look at Lily Hook Glacier, and he took a picture, an incredibly well-preserved picture of that glacier, and just by comparison, and by standing at the same spot where he looked at that glacier, it had retreated some 6 kilometers, according to the experts that I showed that to. And so that was the first sign of that made me think that, you know, things were accelerating a lot faster than they were predicted to. And so, and then that next spring in 2006, in April of 2006, I went with 7 other companions to the North Pole by dog sled from the Borneo station, not from land, but from the station that's on the 90th degree. And so after 4 days and 3 nights of crossing the ice sheet, we reached the North Pole. But I think, and we had problems back then because there were large areas of open water. There were the ice was getting thinner in some spots, and one of my team fell into the water, which is a whole event in itself, and you have to make sure you change clothes very quickly before the cold gets you. But that was also another indicator that things were changing rapidly then. And so, and I don't think that kind of expedition on dog sled would be possible now at that time of year. I mean, Johan can expand on that, but I really don't think that would be possible to do now. So I was very happy to do that then, but it gave me a great sense of what was happening there and what, and then of course, this past June, we did this cruise with a lot of people from Monaco, some different, all the different stakeholders that are concerned with environmental issues in Monaco, but also some people from the museum, from the science center, from the foundation, of course, but also some people who were just interested in the Arctic. But we brought some scientists along with us too, and there was a whole series of lectures and presentations on the Arctic region, but also on Antarctica, because I think it's important, and I'll get back to that a little later on, to make the link, to have scientists meet also to discuss both polar regions. And so this was a commemorative cruise because this year we are commemorating the 100th year of my great-grandfather's passing. And so it was only fitting that we went to the regions that he really was fascinated more about, and really that helped shaped his scientific approach to exploration in general and to oceanographic studies. And so yes, what we observed, what everybody observed on this cruise was that, you know, there were some days where the weather was very mild, and there were some days where it was 15, 16 degrees Celsius, and I know that at the research station up in New Olusund, this was, I think it was last year that they reported the highest temperature in the Arctic, which was 20 degrees or 21 degrees. That is unheard of, and that is if that repeats itself too often, that we will be in serious problem there.
And an initiative, a polar initiative, came out of this, right?
So yeah, with the foundation, we decided to launch with others, with other organizations, a polar initiative. So it focuses on three basic points. The first one is to have a forum where scientists and researchers from both the Arctic and the Antarctic can meet and confront ideas, and we thought that was important. So that's going to happen every other year. We've helped in a campaign to lobby on different issues to raise awareness on the fragility of both polar regions, but mostly and the first step of that was to lobby for the ban against heavy fuels in both Arctic regions, and that's been very successful. And then the third point is to launch a series of scholarships with two organizations that are in Antarctica, SCAR and IS, for young scientists to promote polar research and to encourage polar research. And so I'm very happy that my foundation was instrumental in getting these programs moving.
Well, thank you very much for doing that. And this is just an example of some of the recent things that Prince Albert has done. He has a whole lineage of projects that he's initiated and engaged in over the years. So thank you very much. Johan, to you, you know, it's the planetary boundaries. When that became got into the public sector, into the lexicon, people didn't really understand what it was, and you brilliantly defined that. And anybody who cares about planet Earth should know about these, should read up on the planetary boundaries, because it really is telling us what we can and what we cannot do. There's no negotiation. And so my question to you is, as director of the co-director of the Potsdam Climate Institute, you have recently put forward into the public a new study. Can you tell us the most current scientific data and information on the Arctic and the Arctic sea ice?
Yeah, thanks Sally, and Prince Albert, and then dear colleagues, friends. So just to mention briefly that the planetary boundary framework does not come just out of the blue. It was a natural incremental advancements in science from all the evidence that we are putting so much unsustainable pressures on the planet. We're in the Anthropocene, that we face tipping points, and that we can actually define the desired state of the planet to support humanity, namely the Holocene, the extraordinarily stable state we have had of the planet over the past 12,000 years, since we left the last ice age 12,000 years ago. So it was a kind of a combination of scientific advancements that took that incremental step. And the purpose of the planetary boundaries is to protect humanity from crossing tipping points. Because when you cross a tipping point, things get irreversible. And irreversibility means that we drift off towards a less and less livable planet. And among those tipping elements, there are only 16 of them, which we have published just before the New York Climate Week. It's in September this year, mapping out the 16 tipping elements. They're actually listed also in the IPCC. One of them is the Greenland ice sheet and the whole polar region, because this is one of the big biophysical climate regulating system on planet Earth. But to come to the Arctic, let me just share with you something that I find very frustrating, that is not well understood. You know, today we can say unequivocally, not only that we're causing climate change, but that every human being on planet Earth is impacted. There's no doubt at all that the most vulnerable communities in the world are impacted most because of the social fragility. But did you know that the ground zero of the most rapid changes on planet Earth is in the Arctic? The Arctic is where things are happening 3 times faster on average, sometimes 4 times faster, as you pointed out, Sally, than the average temperature rise. So, you know, we have so much scientific evidence that we don't want to, under any circumstances, pass the 1.5 degree threshold limit, but the Arctic is already at 3 degrees. Actually, Europe is already at 2 degrees. The northern hemisphere has an amplified warming. In the Arctic, this means accelerated loss of sea ice, and it is accelerating. It is a very fast, and it's a non-linear dynamic. But which is undermining the life support for all species in the Arctic, but also for the 4 or 5 million people that make their living in the Arctic. I mean, we tend to forget that this is one more indigenous community that depends on a stable ice sheet in the Arctic. But what I want to share with you is actually coupled to the slide that you showed, Sally, on the arrows between the tipping point systems. Because not only is the Arctic the ground zero, but it's interconnected with the functions of the different tipping point systems on planet Earth. So what happens is the following. Our planet is actually a system of biology, chemistry, and physics. And there are 2 thermodynamic engines that are connected to the Arctic. Number 1 is the polar jet stream. The polar jet stream is a river of air that flows from the west to the east, 10 kilometers up in the atmosphere, above the North Pole. It's driven from the gradient of warm air in the equator and cold air in the Arctic. This is a thermodynamic engine. It flows rapid air, which keeps the whole jet stream in a very stable circular form, pushing all the weather systems across the North Atlantic, you know, hitting the UK and basically determining heat waves, rainfall, low pressure, high pressure in the entire part of Europe. Now, this thermodynamic engine is slowing down because of the rapid melting of the Arctic, because it's warming so much, so the gradient is weakened. It means that the jet stream starts meandering, and you get a lock-in of high and low pressure systems. And we see the impacts. The massive heat waves and burning in Europe that has been happening time and time again is associated to this jet stream lock-in. You may remember the terrible summer in British Columbia last year. 49.6 degrees Celsius, and the burning down of the town of Lytton. That was an omega blockage of the jet stream related to the Arctic melting. So you imagine, the Arctic is impacting on a big biophysical, major thermodynamic engine regulating weather across the entire northern hemisphere. But the second one, even more dramatic, the one that Sally had on the slide here, is that when the Greenland ice sheet and the Arctic sea ice melts, it releases cold fresh water into the North Atlantic. Well, but that makes a big overturning of heat in the North Atlantic to slow down, because it's another thermodynamic engine, because you have warm saline water flowing from the surface of the Southern Ocean. Saline water is heavy density. It comes up in the North Atlantic, releases heat, which makes it possible to live in my part of the world, in Scandinavia, Gulf Stream. The water sinks and keeps this engine floating. But when cold fresh water dilutes this, the salinity gradient weakens and the engines slow down. and the AMOC has slowed down with 15%. This pushes the monsoon system further south, which can explain why the Amazon rainforest, another tipping point system, is receiving less rainfall and burning faster. But it also means that warm saline water is stuck in the Antarctica, which can explain why the West Antarctic ice shelf is melting faster. So can you imagine? The Arctic is connected via the overturning of heat in the North Atlantic with Antarctica. And what happens in the Arctic impacts on Antarctica. So we're all sitting in this interconnected, complex system where the Arctic is really a ground zero.
Yes, yeah. And it's my understanding that the loss of the sea ice is linked to a wobbly jet stream and linked to, obviously, because of what you just said, the slowing down of the AMOC and the Gulf Stream. Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
These are increasingly scientifically verified linkages.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. Some of what you are experiencing, Shreya, in the Himalayas and in Nepal is similar but different because you are struggling, your family's struggling with rapid melting of glaciers. But tell us your story. Tell us about that.
Thank you, Sally. It's an honor to be here with amazing panelist and His Serene Highness. Hi everyone, Namaskar. My name is Shreya Kesi and I'm from Nepal, a country rich in natural resources, amazing landscapes and snow and sky towering mountains. We worship nature and ask its blessing to survive and thrive. My hometown, Solukhumbu, lies in the lap of Himalayas and it is home to Mount Everest, which is the world's highest peak. And it is called Sagarmatha in Nepali and it translates to Goddess of Sky. Nepal is synonymous with mountains and it has world's 8th highest mountain among the 14 peaks. And we have glacial lakes that are situated in the upper region, and it also holds special religious significance for us, especially Hindus and Buddhists. But over the, they say that Nepal, heaven is myth, but Nepal is real, but we are the first-hand victim of climate crisis. Over the past 24 years, I have seen dramatic changes in the climate. Global warming has thinned snow cover and made glaciers retreat. Since 1997, we have had 26 major glacial lake outburst flood, and the community, who lives in the downstream part, we live in the constant fear of being wiped away by those glacial lake outburst flood. Just imagine being washed away by the glacier. Just imagine losing everything that you have owned in your lifetime in a second. I know it's hard to imagine for you, but we have been through this. So it's difficult to be there, and I feel like in my family, we also had to abandon farming because no matter how hard we tried, the production was so little. Unfortunately, this is the story of most of the villagers in my country. The agricultural production, it has depleted so rapidly because of changes in the monsoon pattern, changes in the snowfall pattern, and also in some places there is too much rainfall, some places there is too little rainfall, and even drought also. And this, my love for my hometown, for my community, drives me to be a part of Arctic Angel, a coalition of committed women climate justice activists around the world, and to fight for the protection of the ocean. I feel frustrated and anger somehow because both the Arctic region and also Himalayas, they hold global significance, but it is very less talked about and it seems neglected in the global sphere. In nature, everything is interconnected, and from the loss of snow in the mountains to the loss of ice in the Arctic region, it is inextricably interconnected with the rising temperature, and this is destroying the natural balance on which entire ecosystem, on which entire human life depends. And Nepal is also a part of the Hindu-Kush Himalayan region, which is often termed as third pole because it has immense glacier ice, and it provides food, snow, and ecosystem services to a population of more than 250 million people in that region. Therefore, mountain is not just a source of water for us, it's an integral part of our identity, and it makes us who we are. And both the Arctic and Hindu-Kush Himalayan region, it has fragile landscape, it holds global significance, and because of these common factors, I feel like there are many things that can be interconnected and built on the good practices, and also it opens up a whole new door of collaboration beyond the border. And of course, talking about this intergenerational collaboration is very much important, because we have not been talking about Arctic since now. We have been talking about Arctic since many, many years ago. So we have to connect the fight that our elders has fought, and to connect these struggles. And I think it will also spark a whole new level of intergenerational collaboration and to work together for the protection of Arctic. Lastly, I want to conclude by saying that what happens in the Arctic does not stay in the Arctic, and we know that. Dr. Johan also mentioned that, and His Highness also mentioned this in the point. From globs in Nepal to devastating floods in Pakistan to drought in Africa, everything is interconnected, and it is interlinked with the loss of glacier ice. Everything begins there. So everyone, everywhere, in every corner of the world, we are impacted by the loss of Arctic region. So it may, we may not have realized the connection, but if we see deeply, we are being impacted. Therefore, it is important to realize the loss of Arctic in a whole systems approach. The cryosphere region, it is one of the 5 Earth system, and it interacts to give us the life support system that we need to have life on the Earth. So it is important to recognize this, and everyone have to step up and to work for the Arctic. It's not just a issue of people living in the Himalayas or people living near the oceans or like people living in the Arctic region. Everyone has to step up and do everything possible from their side to protect the Arctic. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, most of us have not been in that kind of situation where we're fearful at night that there's going to be a rush of water and ice that comes down and on your home. I mean, most of us have not experienced that. So thank you. And there's a proverb here in Africa that is, the youth can run faster, but the elders know the way. And I would like to introduce an elder who is a legend, Dr. Sylvia Earle. Hello, Sylvia.
Oh, hello, Your Deepness.
Yes, yes. Good to see you. Thank you for being here. So Sylvia is one of the most remarkable women, I think, on this planet. She's a legend. She has unrelentingly, for decades, pushed in front of leaders, in front of the public, anybody that she can talk to, the press, about the importance of the oceans, the importance of protecting all of the life forms there, because the biodiversity in the ocean is staggering, and we know very, very little about it, actually. We probably know more about the surface of the moon than we do the deep oceans. So Sylvia is, she's on the Patron of Nature board at IUCN. She's a resident explorer at the National Geographic. She has written some 200 books and articles. She is one of the instigators and did a lot of work on Google Ocean, and we just don't have enough time to really honor her work. So Sylvia, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Sally. You and Your Serene Highness share the elder title as Ocean Elders. And it's great to be on this panel with you and Johan and Shreya.
And you've been... Go ahead.
And to have the opportunity to weigh in on behalf of the principal driver of climate, that would be the ocean. Johan, your description of the planetary boundaries, the factors, the biogeophysical and chemical framework that makes Earth different from every other place in the universe. There are rocks, there's water elsewhere in the universe, but only here is there a liquid ocean filled with life. It comprises 97% of the biosphere where life on Earth actually exists. And it's not surprising, it's where 97% of Earth's water is too. The focus here is on the frozen ends of the planet, especially the Arctic ground zero, if you will. What has not adequately been addressed in climate considerations from the very beginning is the fact that Earth is alive. We are really beginning as climate scientists to follow the carbon not just on the land, and realizing that the destruction of the forests, the loss of the tightly connected ecosystems on the land, the disruption and displacement of systems that have been developing since the beginning of life on Earth, really, that has consequences. But the ocean is the dominant place where carbon occurs. It's where life occurs. We are all carbon-based units, if you will. But in that three-dimensional realm, we have only begun to put on the balance sheet the extravagant way that we have disrupted the life cycle, the living systems in the ocean, the wildlife, if you will, everything from whales to krill to, of course, the fish, the squid, all of these creatures that have been really, since the middle of the 20th century, taken on a scale that is unprecedented. I mean, we measure wildlife taken from the ocean rarely as individuals, mostly by the ton. And the decline is apparent. Half the coral reefs, seagrass meadows, marshes, mangroves, but now even more so, looking at the high seas where, until fairly recently in our history, we have not been able to access. And the deep sea, similarly. All of this is, Johan, as you make it clear, everything connects, everything. That Earth is one interacting biogeophysical, biogeochemical miracle. What you do anywhere has consequences basically everywhere. And we're highlighting here what's happening in the Arctic. But the Arctic is affected by what happens everywhere else. Imagine if we did not know that. Imagine if we did not have the evidence that is being presented at this COP conference more than ever before. How it's the living Earth. It's not just the physical nature of ice, it's the living nature of the whole system that affects the ice. I had a chance in 1998 to go to the North Pole aboard the Russian icebreaker, the Sovietsky Soyuz. And as we plowed through, at the time, it was like 2.5 meters of ice, just barging our way through it, upending this massive, massive blocks. As they flipped over, you could see the underside was a golden color, or in some cases a greenish color, the forests of life that are on the underside of the ice. And little fish, amphipods, and other creatures were just popping out as the ice overturned. You know, from the surface it looks bleak and barren with an occasional bird. Sometimes if you're far enough south from the North Pole itself, you might see seals and polar bears. But where do they get their groceries? What is the carbon cycle like at the top of the world, and similarly in Antarctica.
Sylvia, do you, sorry for interrupting you. We're getting tight on time, but I want to ask you, do you think it's realistic that we can save the Arctic ice shield and that we can save the oceans? Do you think it's realistic, and who's going to do that?
It's going to take all of us doing whatever individually and collectively we have to turn from decline to recovery. We cannot go back to what was, but we can make things better than they otherwise would be if you identify what are the problems, what's causing the melting. You say it's us, it's burning fossil fuels, it's warming the atmosphere. But it's also looking at these tightly connected cycles of life, of carbon. And we say plant trees, that helps. But we also should stop cutting the trees. That would help even more. Looking at the ocean, we should think about how much disruption we're causing by taking wildlife on such an extravagant level, disrupting the bio part, the biochemical part of what affects climate, and it does all tie together. So, you ask the question, look in the mirror, and what are you individually capable of doing? First, you have to know what the problems are, and Johan has really put it out there. Here's the evidence. And listening to Your Serene Highness, the perspective of rapid change, we know how to cause the change, that what's happening. And once you identify the problem, then figure out what piece of the problem can I do something about. We have to look at overarching policies. That's what's happening at this COP conference, trying to say what laws, what policies, what national and international actions can we take. But everything starts with you, whoever you are. It takes all of us doing whatever we can, times now 7, almost 8 billion of us, to do whatever bit we can.
Yes, agreed. And I think that youth are, the young people are really the Achilles heel in all of this, because when you see and hear people like Shreya, young people like Shreya, and in our organization, Global Choices, of which I'm the president and co-founder, we have 32 Arctic Angels, and in 28 different countries. Each of them is an advocate for climate justice and also for the Arctic, because they are actually experiencing the results of losing that system. And they're the best advocates. And now they're starting to sit in on decision-making forums. So it's got to be a two-way street, because your generation is inheriting what we do or what we don't do. I would like to pose a question to you, Prince Albert, and what do you think, as a head of state in the policy arena, what do you think could happen if enough leaders got on board to protect the Arctic? Because it's not just a regional resource, it is a global commons, particularly the Central Arctic Ocean, which is non-jurisdictional, and that's where all the ice retreats in the summer. Belongs to all of us.
Well, I think it's a very touchy subject, of course, and all the countries bordering the Arctic, the Arctic Council is the organization that tries to regulate things around the Arctic. But of course, there's a big country that has a big shoreline across the Arctic, and they can't seem to want to give up on too many of their prerogatives. So we have to make sure that that there's enough international consensus to take better policies to protect the Arctic. I think taking the example of the Antarctic Treaty, okay, it's a very different circumstance that the Antarctic is a continent, and so it was probably easier to, although it wasn't easy at the time, but it was easier to set up a framework and a treaty on a continent that was really not very well known and not very well, although there was starting to be a lot of research, but when it first started, that there was very little going on, and so everyone had to take a piece of that pie, but it was very well regulated, and it was it's we,
No,
and we have to keep it that way.
Yeah.
It has to be a continent set for science and for peaceful scientific exploration. And so if we can manage to do something along those lines for the Arctic Ocean, I think we would make a lot of headway. But of course, there's the international law of the sea, and that it's very difficult legally to duplicate that on the Arctic Ocean.
Well, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
No. Well, we're all on the spot.
Yeah, we're all on the spot. That's true. But I know that you are such a collaborator. And the collaboration is really what is going to get us out of this. And so that's why I have admired your projects, because they're all about collaboration. And new policy is going to be about collaboration and also whole systems thinking. We can't make our decisions in little compartments anymore. Johan, very quickly, what is your next, what is your vision for what comes next as far as science in action?
Yeah, we have two let's say, very concrete next steps. Number one is that we're actually translating all the planetary boundary science into science-based targets. Businesses around the world have really stepped on board the Science-Based Target Initiative to translate the Paris Agreement to a carbon budget, to targets for carbon. Now we need to do the same, just as Sylvia points out, for the oceans, for biodiversity, for nitrogen, for phosphorus, for fresh water, for air pollutants, for microplastics. We have the science for that. But the second one, which is even more exciting scientifically, but perhaps also policy-wise, is exactly what you touched upon, Sally, that large parts of the Arctic is actually a global commons. I would push it even further. Even if they have national jurisdiction, we scientifically can today prove that we all depend on a healthy Amazon rainforest. We all depend on the green ice sheet being stable. We all depend on the ocean circulation functioning, because it determines the life support for every community on planet Earth. So they're all global commons, and they have to be governed as commons. Of course, you have to have a mandate of legal jurisdiction, but you also need to be able to have a collective governance where you can actually claim some support for being stewards of your local natural resources as a commons for humanity. And that's what we're working on right now.
Yes, exactly. And I see that we are out of time. And I would just like to thank each and every one of you for being here. And Shreya, we didn't have time for a second question for you. And Sylvia, thank you so much. I think you're
Thank you, Sylvia.
in California, USA. Thank you. Thank you.
Sylvia, we miss you. Sorry you're not here with us.
Yes, indeed. And please give a round of applause for these outstanding humans who are doing the right thing. The fate The fate of the poles is our future, and our future is indivisible. Thank you very much.
Thank you.